Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Esme, and I'm a producer for the How To Academy, and you've tuned in to an Inkspots event with Frank Cottrell-Boyce. You might already know Frank as the author of the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang sequels and the award-winning Millions, or you might know him from his brilliant films. But today, Frank is here to talk about his latest novel, Noah's Gold. He'll be giving a short talk about it, and then it'll be over to you to ask him lots of questions. These can be about the book, about writing in general, or just anything you can think of. So do ask lots. We'll try and get through as many as possible, and you can put them in at the Q&A box. So please join me in welcoming Frank Cottrell-Boyce.
Hi everybody, welcome to my very, very, very scruffy office. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to talk to you today about Noah's Gold, which maybe you should be afraid. Noah's Gold is partly about when the internet broke down, and then last week the internet did break down. So that was a bit strange, because a few years ago I also wrote a book called The Astounding Broccoli Boy, which is about a viral epidemic, and that happened as well. So this is the office where the future is predicted. I started to write this Noah's Gold at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was giving lots of online creative writing classes. And I was already writing the book in this book because I write by hand. I was writing it in here, write by hand. And in one of the creative writing classes that I was giving to young people, one of the exercises I gave was, you should imagine yourself somewhere you would like to be. And one of the young people in the class said, "And are you doing that in your new book, in this big book, Frank?" And I wasn't at all. So I thought that was a great idea. And it was given to me by one of the young children in the class that I would write somewhere I wanted to be. So the book ended up being set on an island off the coast of Donegal. And that means the book has maps. It's got this fantastic map on the cover. I love a book with a map. I've always loved books with maps because they take you somewhere very special. Here is one of the first books I ever had, which is the Norse myths. And that had this map of the entire cosmos in it. Where is the map? There it is. All the different realms. So I love a book with a map. And here is my copy of Lord of the Rings with a map. I think a story should take you somewhere. So I tried to do that with this book. So I set it on an island, and the thing about islands is that if you set a story on an island, adventures start to happen. I was full of excitement writing this book. I've had a wonderful time writing it. It's the most I've ever enjoyed writing a book. But stories that are set on islands tend to go terribly wrong. So if you think of the greatest book set on an island, it's Treasure Island, where people end up building palisades and shooting at each other. And a really, really important book set on an island is called Lord of the Flies. And that's a book that has influenced a lot of people's thinking, because that's a story about some children who get washed up on a desert island. They try to keep the fire lit. They can't keep the fire lit. They try to grow food. They can't. And they end up splitting into tribes and hunting each other and killing each other. And that story of people breaking down and killing each other, that was in everybody's minds at the beginning of the pandemic, if you remember. The government thought that we would all be breaking into supermarkets and clubbing each other to death with toilet rolls. And I had a strong feeling that that is not how people behave, that there are happier stories, there are bolder stories, there are more hopeful stories to be told. And I found this amazing story. I found this is so funny. This is a true story, okay? This is a completely true story about a group of school children on one of the islands of Tonga who decided that they didn't like their school dinners. Now, if you didn't like your school dinners, you would probably say, "I'm going to take sandwiches from now on," or "I'm going to take some money and go to Greg's for a steak bake and a meal deal." But they thought bigger than that. They thought, no meal deals for us. We will go in search of better food. So they decided to sail to Fiji, and they borrowed a boat. They weren't good at sailing. They borrowed a boat to go to Fiji. And this is what happened, right? Let me show you a map. I'm going to show you a map. Here's the map. Maps, we love maps. Here comes the map. Right, so I don't know if you can see this map, but this is Tonga, where they set out from. This up here is Fiji, where they wanted to go. And they didn't. They got blown off course, and they ended up on this island called Atta. Can you see a little picture of it? Hope you can. And Atta is, as you can see, pretty steep. It's actually the plug of an ancient volcano. And in all the million years that people have been on Earth, and all the hundreds of thousands of years that clever people have been sailing around the little islands of the South Pacific in canoes, no one, literally no one, not one human being has ever lived on Atta. No one looked at that spiky island sticking up out of the sea and thought, that looks cozy. So it's completely forever uninhabited. And, oh, I've just noticed, see this island up here, Samoa? That's where Robert Louis Stevenson lived, who wrote Treasure Island. Anyway, so they got washed up on Atta, this little group of children, 6 schoolboys, and they should have eaten each other because there was nothing to eat. There was nowhere, there wasn't even a proper beach, but they didn't. That's not what happened. What happened is that they really looked after each other. They climbed this steep mountain and they found it was very fertile on the top. They found chickens and they raised chickens. They grew vegetables. They looked after each other and they ended up having lots of time on their hands. And with the time on their hands, did they fight? No, they didn't. They built a gym. This is the Lord of the Flies picture. They were rescued in the end. So I'm going to spin past that book, but this is them when they were rescued. As you can see, they look really fit and pumped because among all the other things they did was they built a gym, they carved statues, and they made little guitars to play with. So they came back looking really fantastic. And that seemed to me a really hopeful story, that if children got washed up on an island or stranded in a pandemic, they wouldn't eat each other or fight each other. They would do something creative and bold and brilliant. And that was in my mind when I was writing this book, Noah's Gold, which is the story of a school trip that goes hideously, hideously wrong, because the school trip is run by a geography teacher who, even though he's a geography teacher, doesn't use a map, but uses instead the GPS in the car. They're supposed to be going to effectively the Amazon warehouse nearby to look at how Amazon works, but the GPS doesn't hear warehouse, it just hears Amazon, or as it says in the book, Orinoco. So it tries to take them to the Orinoco. It just keeps going west and west and west and west and west until it falls off the edge of island and ends up on a little ferry boat, then to a little island, then it literally falls off a cliff and strands them there. And this does happen. People trust their GPS too much. There is a phrase in Yellowstone Park, death by GPS, because people follow their GPS instead of looking around them and using a map. Not that I don't love my GPS, I do. Anyway, the most important thing, if you are washed up on a desert island or an uninhabited island off the coast of Ireland, is what are you going to eat? And how are you going to cook it? So that is the main problem facing the hero, Noah. What's he going to eat? And I thought I would read you a bit from well into the book, trying to avoid spoilers, where he decides that, well, they're in the sea, so they could go fishing. And he finds in an abandoned cottage a fishing rod. But the only bait I could see was one leftover potato in the bottom of the pan. I thought about eating the potato. They found potatoes. But then I thought about eating the potato myself. And it turns out that that would have been a much better idea. I looked into the water from the end of the jetty. There were streaks of sunlight under the surface, like the shreds of orange peel in marmalade. Tasty looking little brown fish nudged right up to my potato. And then they turned round and swam away. I don't know what the zoological name for those fish is, but I decided to call them ungrateful fish. I wondered if the fish further out to sea would be less ungrateful. So I stepped off the jetty onto the first rock. I hopped from there to the second, and then to the next, and then to the next. I got quite a long way out to sea just by rock hopping. The water looked colder and darker and deeper, but there was something in it. A big, white, wobbly square, like a floating tablecloth or an underwater ghost. It got smaller, then it got bigger, then it got smaller, then it got bigger, then it got smaller, then it got bigger, and I realised it was swimming down and up and down and up. It was a very big fish, or as I like to think of it, a very big potential breakfast, which is a good swap for one potato. I dropped the line into the water just above what I thought was its head, trying to find its mouth. Then the whole shape vanished and everything turned black. 1 minute, I was standing on a rock. And the next minute, I was being dragged through the waves and out to sea. The big white tablecloth was not one very big fish. The big white tablecloth was just one tiny part of an absolutely colossal fish. And the absolutely colossal fish had closed its big white mouth around my potato and the fishing line and decided on a potato starter with a main course of Noah. I was now the big breakfast. The shock of the cold seawater froze my brain, and so my hands didn't think about letting go of the fishing rod until we were way out to sea. And when I did let go, I had one happy little moment where I thought I could bobble back to the surface and just swim back to the jetty. Wrong. I surfaced, but the salty water was up my nose and I couldn't breathe. The spray was blinding my eyes. My hand hit something slippy and surprisingly cold. It was the side of the absolutely colossal fish. At least if I was holding on to her, she couldn't eat me. She wasn't moving fast. She was just kind of dawdling along on the surface. I tried levering myself clear of the water. Up ahead, I could see a dark triangle. Perhaps it was the sail of a yacht. I tried to shout. Water swirled into my mouth. My hand got clear again. And that's when my brain realized that the dark triangle wasn't the sail of a yacht. It was a fin, like the kind of fins that sharks have. I was clinging on to a shark, a big shark, a very big shark, a shark the size of a house. The shark had barnacles all along her side. I tried to wedge my fingers in between them as she headed into the deeper water, towards the mainland. I can even hear church bells ringing over there. I thought, maybe she'll sail me right back to the mainland. It would be pretty cool sailing into harbour on the back of a massive shark. But the shark had other ideas. She veered off, carving a huge, slow circle in the water until we were facing our island again. And now I had a truly excellent view of the island, but I couldn't really appreciate it because I had noticed something over to my left and over to my right. More triangular fins. Because my shark was not the only shark in the sea. There were sharks on either side of me, all heading back towards the bay in perfect unison, like something from Strictly Sharks Come Dancing. One of them flipped its tail out of the water and smashed it down again, as if to say, I have a tail the size of a truck. I get first bite. The island was there in front of me, just like on Google Earth 3D. There was the jetty and the rocks, and the green hill rising up behind, and there was a dark fringe along the top, which I knew was the woods. I could see a thin grey scribble of smoke rising from the fire, and as we got nearer, I could even hear Lola trying to get the others to tidy up. The sea was very still. Suddenly what looked like tiny slivers shot clear of the water and splashed back again just ahead of us. It sounded like applause, as though the sea was appreciating the shark come dancing. I wanted to let go, but I couldn't. I didn't know if my brain was frozen or my fingers were frozen. I shouted for help. I shouted a lot. The others must have heard me, but it was Eve who came running down the beach. The shark and I sailed along the line of the beach, past the big black rocks. Eve and Dario were now clambering over those rocks, trying to keep pace with the shark. Dario was shouting something, but the breeze blew his words to pieces. And when the wind dropped, I heard, "Basking shark! Basking shark!" Seriously? Seriously? Dario thought I might be interested in what species of shark was about to eat me? "It's a vegetarian," he yelled. "It's harmless." Okay, the shark might be a vegetarian, but did it know that I was not a vegetable? She suddenly hoisted herself clear of the water, and for 1 second, I was sitting on the back of a flying shark. And I'm going to stop there and let you ask questions. I hope that's a good place to stop. Hi, Esme.
Hi, Frank. That was brilliant. Thank you. I remember that part of the book. It's fantastic. We've lots of questions coming on, but please keep asking them because I'm going to try and ask lots. But first question is from Amy, who's 9, and she says, why do you write by hand? Do you write the whole story and then type it all up? That must take a long time.
Amy, that's a wonderful question. I'm really glad you asked it. I always used to write on my computer because that's a grown-up thing to do. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, I was just sitting in front of the computer all day. I would be Zooming a school, then I'd be having a meeting about a film, and then I'd be trying to write. And writing began to feel like work, which it must never do. It must always be a joy, because it is a privilege and a pleasure to write stories. So that's why I got the book. I got a book and I wrote it in the book. And writing it in the book, I'll show you. My handwriting is very messy handwriting. I left a page here in case I had a better idea. No better ideas on that page. And lots of crossing outs and misspellings and blotches and sometimes little sketches. And actually the whole thing started with a drawing. I did a drawing of the island because I thought, where do I want to be? I did a rubbish drawing because I'm very bad at drawing. But I just threw it down and I wrote in that. Can you see this couch behind me? It's broad. Oh, you mustn't. Don't look at my office. It's a tip. But there's a couch there. And I sat on the couch and I wrote with a pen and I felt like I was back in year 6, which was my favorite year, which was the most creative year. So it felt like a game again. And you know what I did after that? Because you said, was it not a lot of work to type it up? I didn't type it up. I used my phone and read the whole book into the phone, and it turned it into a file. And what was great about that was, first of all, I could hear it. So I was making changes straight away. You know, I'd go, oh, I would change on them. And then the other thing was that it was full of terrible mistakes because your phone is not brilliant at dictate. So the second draft was me reading it. The third draft was the first time I ever had to sit at a computer, was the third draft. And it was so fun because it was full of ludicrous mistakes. It was full of, you know, I'm coming. Yes, I know it's dinner time. I'll be there in 2 minutes. Oh, can someone answer that door? And all that stuff was in the book. And I had to kind of go through and cross it and change all the weird mistakes that it made. And that was fun. So I'd written 3 drafts before it began to feel like work. So I will always do that from now on. I'm writing the next book in a nice notebook with a nice pen, sprawled on the couch. Amy, thank you so much for asking that question.
Harry, who's 8, says, I thought your book was really funny, but he wants to know if you've ever been to the island where it's all set.
Oh, Harry, thank you so much. And thank you so much for saying that nice thing about the book. Yes, because I love those islands. There's lots of islands off the coast of Donegal. My wife's family are in Ireland, and we also go to Scotland a lot, and I love those islands. And I have a terrible confession to make, which is that what kind of dad am I? I'm not a very careful dad. So a long time ago, when my older children were little, we were in the Scottish Islands, and I saw a man taking a boat to another island, which we'd never been to. And I said, oh, would you take us over? You know, and he went, yeah, I'm sort of the ferry. Yeah, come on, get on. So he got off, and I said, you know, we'll just get the ferry back next time, the next ferry back. And the next ferry back was Wednesday. And we had a packet of bourbon biscuits with us, and there was nobody on the island. Well, there was a hotel, but it was closed, and he would be making a delivery. So I marooned my family on quite a windy Scottish island with a packet of bourbon biscuits, and I don't mean a big packet of bourbon biscuits. And luckily, the man who dropped us off had had a think as he was sailing away, and a few hours later came back and said, you didn't mean to spend 3 days here, did you? And we went, no, we didn't. Can you take us home? So thank goodness for kind people. But so we were never really marooned, but we were kind of slightly marooned. And in those islands, you do that fish that I'm describing there. That's a real thing called a basking shark. And this is a very zoologically accurate picture by the brilliant Stephen Lenton. But they have this, and you see this colossal mouth, and they do just dawdle. They're very, if you know, if you can get out in a little rowing boat, or sometimes people will take you, they just bobble along on the surface and you can get right up to them. They're very friendly, but they are huge. I think they're the second biggest fish in the world. They're absolutely gigantic.
Gosh, you wouldn't want to be riding one of those on a cold.
No, but you're kind of tempted to, because it's so well on the surface. You kind of think, I couldn't sit on that.
We have a message from Duke, who's 9.
Duke! Hello, Duke. I know. It's great to hear you.
Duke says that he loves your book and he's writing lots of books because you told me I could do drawings first last time, and I've written 3 series of books and drawings now. And when I'm older, I want to write a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang book because I love yours so much. So
Oh, thank you so much, Duke. Well, we'll do that together. I'd love to see the drawings.
do you
Duke,
always draw before you write your stories?
no, that's a new thing of like trying to kind of get joy back into it, you know, and it's been so good. I definitely recommend doing drawings first. And I know that I think my favourite map, definitely, and probably one of my favourite books is Ursula Le Guin, The Wizard of Earthsea. And they're amazing books about a school for wizards. They're just wonderful books, but she drew the maps before she started to write the stories. And I love a map. Everybody loves a map. Lovely to hear from you, Duke, by the way.
Mina, who's 11, similar kind of question, asked, what motivated you to finish any book? How do you always get to the end?
Oh, was that Amina asked that question?
Yeah,
Amina, that is a very perspicacious question, because I know lots of other writers who can't start till they know the ending. And I've always thought, they're the clever ones. Yeah, I never know the ending. And now I kind of think it's kind of good not knowing the ending, because you set off with you come up with a kind of impossible idea at the beginning, and because you haven't worked it out, it surprises you. An ending should be surprising. So I think it's good if you, the writer, are the first person to be surprised by it. But it takes a lot of courage to write a book without knowing the ending, because you never know if it's going to work. I'm about halfway through my next book, and it's got like a ludicrous idea at the beginning, and I know I've got to pay it off, and I don't quite know how I will. And that's quite it's kind of a tingly, exciting feeling. So I want to write the end because I want to find out how it ends.
We have an amazing question from Alice, who is 8. And she says, if you could hold on to a sea creature to go through the ocean, what would you choose? I would choose a manta ray.
Oh, a manta. Oh, wow. Who's that question from?
Alice. She's 8.
Alice, I admire your taste in fish, because that's a very elegant way to travel, isn't it? It'd be kind of very slow and kind of, yeah, that's lovely. Well, I think I'll go for the basking shark, because it travels a long way and it stays on the surface, which is a big advantage. I mean, it does dive sometimes, but it does stay on the top, so you get a good view. But I'm impressed by the manta ray option, I have to say. But I'm going to stick with basking sharks from now on.
It's also a great knowledge from Alice.
Yeah, great knowledge, actually.
Tom, who's 9, asks, what was your favourite book when you were little, and what would you recommend?
Okay, so I mentioned The Wizard of Earthsea. That's good. It's great. I loved reading Just Williams stories because they're very funny, and they're written by a woman called Richmond Crompton. I do think she's like the funniest writer. I loved Edith Nesbit. I think she's unbeatably funny and emotional as well. She wrote The Phoenix and the Carpet and The Five Children and It and The Story of the Amulet, and these are all wonderful. They're quite hard to read now because they're old, but get someone to read them to you. But since you're in my office, I'll show you this. I was given these books when I was about 8, and they're short stories by Joan Aiken. This is The Kingdom Under the Sea. Oh, they're both The Kingdom Under the Sea. I've got another one called Necklace of Raindrops. This is my original, and they are great stories, but I loved the book. You know, we don't talk enough about how great illustrators are. This was illustrated by Jan Pienkowski, and look at these pictures. I mean, they're just like amazing. And I honestly thought this book was like, look, it's in pieces, but I would never let it go. And I don't think I've read it again for years, but just have to hold it. And I'm back there because I thought the book itself was magic, you know, because it's so beautiful. And I thought the book itself was like, look, if any of you have read The House with Chicken Legs, there's Baba Yaga's house on the back of this. It's because that's an old story. So I love, this is by Joan Aiken, who wrote The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. And this is very precious to me. You can't borrow it.
That's amazing to see it so battered, so well read and so loved. Maya, who's 12, has asked, have you always written stories? Oh, what beautiful handwriting. My who's 12 asks, have you always written stories? Have you done it since you were little?
Um, there was a day in year 6 when I started, I wouldn't know is the answer, but all the way through primary school, I had a really good friend. And by the time we got to year 6, everybody had worked out something that they were good at. I thought, where I was thinking, so there are people here who are good at football, and there are people who are good at music, and there are people who are good at drawing. And there was one boy in particular who was very good with his fists. He was absolutely terrifying. And I'm still scared of him. And my friend who I spent all my time with in primary school was off in year 6. He was off for a long time. And so one day I just put all the effort that I used to put into just vaguely chatting and being funny with him into a piece of work. And at the end of the lesson, my teacher collected the work. She looked at my piece of work and she looked at me and she looked at my work and she looked at me and she was like, how did that come out of Frank? If I had laid an egg, she would not have looked more surprised. And she went to the front of the class and she read it out. She read it out. And there was something amazing about hearing someone else read your words. And I'm not saying I wanted to be a writer, but I'm saying that's when I thought, oh, words are something you can be good at. The way some people are good at singing or fighting or football, you could be good at words, and you choose the right word, you can make people think, you can make people cry, you can make people laugh, just the right word in the right place. So that's when I started to think about words.
Similar question. Alice again asks, do other stories ever pop into your imagination whilst you're already writing a story? If so, what do you do with all your ideas?
Oh, right. So I do have an ideas book which stays by my bed, so I won't go and get that. But I do have a separate kind of book just for ideas, but not that many. I think the thing is that people talk about, and there are great stories about people who had an idea and it popped into their head, and it doesn't happen that often. Where ideas really come from is when you start. If you've got just enough of an idea to get going, other ideas will come. Ideas love to dance. Ideas love other ideas. Ideas are magnetic. So if you have even the tiniest bit of an idea, it's exactly like this story with the fish. If you drop an idea, like you've got a little tiny worm of an idea, you might catch a big fish of an idea with it. The only time it's ever happened to me was Sputnik's Guide to Life, because I was at a set of traffic lights on the Formby bypass, not far from here. And the whole idea for Sputnik's Guide to Life popped into my head. And there's Sputnik, the space dog. And that is literally the only time that it ever happened. But every other time it's just like you have a little idea and you start writing and suddenly it becomes a very different idea. So this book started with the idea of the internet collapsing, but it wasn't set on a lovely island. It didn't have golden lighthouses and maps, and it wasn't as much fun as it became. And the book that I'm writing at the moment has got this absolutely bonkers, unbelievably crazy starting point that I don't know if I'll ever be able to pay it off. But hopefully by the time I get to the end, even if it doesn't work, there'll be enough of a book to get rid of that bonkers idea from the beginning anyway.
Well, that's great advice for any future writers watching, and I'll look forward to your next bonkers idea. I think that's all we've got time for today, but if I may, I have one final question which I'd like to ask you, which is, without giving away the plot to Brilliant Noah's Gold, there's a moment towards the end when, after being on an island for quite a long time, the children have to go for dinner with somebody important and they get to choose what's on the menu. And I was wondering, if you'd been marooned on that island, what would you have picked?
Oh, right, okay. I kind of know the answer to this because, I would like a really good, proper fish finger sandwich, but with really good and like bread that I've made, like really nice bread and some salad with it and a bit of tartar sauce, like a really deluxe fish finger sandwich.
Oh, well, I hope you get one soon. Frank, thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to chat to you. Everyone, Noah's Gold is fantastic. We've got lots more Inkspots events coming up in a few weeks, so do stay tuned for all of those. And Alice says I would pick fish fingers too, by the way. Great choice. Frank, have a lovely rest of your weekend, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was really a great pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.